Hello, everyone. In this video this week, we're talking to Michael Wallace, one of RCC's senior engineers, about a brand new tool that we're releasing out in the wild that's going to be completely free. It's what we're calling the RCC FileMaker Layout Optimizer. And this is a tool that Mike Wallace has created, I guess, in his spare time. In a previous life, Mike built rocket ships and nuclear weapons and other things in his spare time, but now in his spare time, he does things in a more peaceful fashion, right, Mike?
Right. Things that don't, do too much damage.
And we do greatly appreciate that. And so this tool, if those of you take it apart and look at it, it's pretty impressive. Certainly something above my pay grade in terms of coding complexity. I want to reference some videos that we've done previously and remind everyone that I've done some videos about learning how to optimize layouts with the FileMaker 14 platform. We talked about custom themes and shared styles, and these go back to some performance optimization videos, things that are possible now in the FileMaker 14 platform, things that you really couldn't do in FileMaker 12 and definitely didn't exist prior to that at all. While we gave you tips and showed you how to do these things, you really couldn't measure in a useful way the benefits without actually hooking up a network performance analyzer, which we actually did. We actually hooked up a server, a client, we put a network measuring tool in between, and we measured the bandwidth going back and forth from FileMaker server to client and measured how you could optimize the layouts. Well, Mike Wallace here actually in a spare time built a tool that will read in your layout and show you the potential wasted code that's in your layout and then help you optimize it. And it's really impressive. And so instead of trying to set up some sort of crazy network analysis tool, this is going to actually be a little FileMaker file that you can run to help you understand maybe wasted space that's within your FileMaker layout. So Mike, congratulations on a great tool. And why don't you give us a quick tour of how this works?
Right now we have the file open, and we also have two copies of FM Starting Point, FM Starting Point 3 and FM Starting Point 4. Now, since FM Starting Point 4 was completely optimized for FileMaker 13, it's not going to have as much overhead as FileMaker 3. Well, that's the premise anyways. And so I'm going to go ahead and go to the same layouts, say contacts in both of these. And so the way that you get the data in is actually very straightforward. Just go into layout mode and then copy all of those elements. So I'm just actually copying the FileMaker elements themselves as if I was going to go to another layout and paste those FileMaker elements. So what I have here is I'm actually using the Base Elements plugin, which is a free plugin. Base Elements has put it out there for people to use, and it's really awesome. Has some nice tools to it, and they're actually kind of excited to see what people do with it. So this will be some good feedback for them on what you can do with it. And so I'm just going to click this button, Load from Clipboard. This part actually is actually very fast. You can see here that it has 310 layout objects loaded, which contains 277 instances of local CSS. And the total weight of the layout is 2.9 megabytes. So the 2.9 megabytes is an estimate based on just how many characters make up the XML that draws these objects. It is possible that it may actually be twice that size based on the encoding, but regardless, it gives you an idea of the proportionate size of the layout.
Yeah, Mike, I've talked to FileMaker Engineering about this, and it's important to understand that while we are seeing CSS and XML visibly at this level, internally, what FileMaker saves and moves back and forth through the network and what's rendered is a hash or a hybrid of this. It's optimized, right? So that number will be somewhat different, but it gives us a good baseline reference here, something that we can use to compare from one layout to the next, right? So that's important.
In fact, let's go ahead and, just out of curiosity, and we're kind of doing this live without any kind of, I haven't even tested this, so let's see what it is in comparing the exact same thing in FM Starting Point 4. Same layout. That's interesting. It's actually bigger according to this in FileMaker 4.
What's important to understand about this is there's actually fewer objects in FM Starting Point 3. There's actually fewer capabilities within FM Starting Point 3. There's the hidden object attributes that we can talk about. FileMaker calls that the POV, or programmatic object visibility, but the ability to hide objects. There's all sorts of new things that can be applied at the layout level. So there's all sorts of things that are potentially hidden in here. So yeah, I mean,
Right.
there's a lot.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more functionality, period. Regardless of the weight, the FM Starting Point 4 has a lot more functionality in it. So it's natural that it's going to be a little heavier. So now that I clicked load from clipboard, I have actually two different options here. Down at the bottom, this one is already here. This is where I can load something that I stored previously. With these two options, I can either run through all the CSS, and it will first goes through and gets rid of the big chunks of the XML that makes up these elements so that it's faster to process. And then the second part of it is that it actually goes through and finds every instance of local CSS on these objects, and then gives us a list of the objects on the layout that have local CSS on them, or CSS overrides, basically the little red triangle that tells you that it's not in a part of the stored theme.
We talked about this in the previous videos. I mean, the goal is to try to get away from local overrides in your FileMaker layouts as much as possible. It helps your layouts render much more quickly. And of course, that's the whole point of this tool, is to find those and try to remove them, or at least understand how many that you have in your layout.
Then the other part of this is, suppose I had a base theme and I applied the theme to the layout. One of the things that FileMaker does when you apply a theme to a layout, all the little instances of local CSS, it doesn't automatically wipe all of those away. You can go through and you'll still see little red triangles that indicate there's local CSS when you've just applied a new theme to a layout. You could go through and on each of those elements and click on the little red triangle and say revert to the save style, and it will get rid of all that extra formatting, which is the tag local CSS in the XML. Or running this second process I have right here, clear local CSS, it actually edits that XML, or at least the vast majority of those local CSS things. There's some of them that are kind of buried down in the XML and it doesn't get everything out. It gets most of that out. And then you can actually paste it back onto your layout, gets it ready right back as a FileMaker object. You can paste it right back and it'll be clean. And you can look and see that all of those red triangles are now gone.
So this tool actually strips out the local CSS for you and allows you to paste the layout back in.
Yes.
That's big.
And even if it's ugly, doesn't look the same as what you had originally, you still gives you the option then of looking at it. Even if you paste it on a second layout, you can look at it, see what's different, and then from that point start building it with the themes the way you should, rather than individually styling each element. If you want something to be italics, then add a new style that is italics and apply it to everywhere that you want it to be italics. So we're going to go ahead and run this find local CSS so we can see all the elements on this layout that have local CSS. So what it's doing now, the first step, 1 of 4, is strips out the full CSS, which is the CSS that makes up the theme of the layout on each of the objects. And that's a big chunk of code that makes up this XML here. So I just rip all that out because I'm not actually going to be using this XML again in this process. So I just rip out all the things I don't need so it's faster for me to process the rest of it. The second, third, and fourth are usually faster than the first one.
Now, Mike, one thing I want to ask right here is that this progress bar is all part of that plugin, right? The Base Elements plugin?
Yes, it is. It's functionality that's built into the Base Elements plugin. It's actually pretty nice. You give it like a message or whatever, and you give it a ending value, basically the end of your loop. And then as your variable updates, that is your counter or whatever, you just send a message to this thing saying this is where I am now, and it updates the little bar along until as soon as you cross your threshold of higher than or equal to what your ending number is, it closes the dialog. Also, if you hit cancel at any point, you can test, like whenever you're doing an update, if they canceled, then you can just do a halt script and just get out of everything immediately right then.
Now, something important to note is I believe you set this up so if that plugin is not installed, it will auto-install itself if someone opens this RCC FileMaker Layout Optimizer, right?
Yes, that is correct. They're installed, just the current version of them are installed in container fields in the preferences layout. And when you open this for the first time, it silently will install it behind the scenes. Now, I will note that if you have this installed, but it's an earlier version than what I have here, and you have manually installed it in the extensions folder of your FileMaker program directory, then unfortunately this is just a problem with FileMaker auto-installing of plugins. This will install it in the correct location, which is like in the users directory and a separate location. There'll be a conflict and it won't actually work. So if you do have a conflict when it auto-installs the plugin because this is a newer version than what you had, just go into your FileMaker extensions folder and delete the one that you had, and it will work going forward.
Cool.
I do have it set up where in most cases it will continually chop off the top of the XML that's processing. So the first part goes slower than the end of the processing in most cases because the XML that it's processing gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's just part of what I've done to try to optimize this as much as possible.
Now, the cool part to note is as this completes, once this is done processing this, it does save this as a report within the file, right? We don't lose this, so you can save this, correct?
Right. You have the option to save it whenever it's done, and I'll walk you through that part. That's what the view stored report is down below. You can select from the reports that you've stored and view those or delete them from here. And when you're done, this actually uses virtual list technology, which is another video we've talked about as well, in order to create the report that you're viewing, first of all, completely in local variables. And so in order to store that for future reference, it creates records that actually writes FileMaker records so you can pull them up later. One of the things that they mentioned in Pause on Error was that there's not many good ways to find this local CSS on a layout. One of the ways they recommended is you just click on the layout and then hold down the tab button while you have your inspector open, and it will cycle through all the objects on the layout just real fast. And you just watch that little triangle for when it turns from black to red. Of course, it turned black, red, black, and it's like, you passed it 23 objects ago by the time you let go of the key. But at least you get some idea of how many, ballpark of how many items are on the layout have local styling. But even with that, it doesn't tell you how much local styling. In other words, do we just have some fields that are italics, or do we have like a whole bunch of styling, rounded corners, different colors that is making up a whole lot of weight in the object, especially using the format painter. If you use the format painter to style objects, that puts a lot of weight into the layout. All right, so this was actually a pretty heavy layout because the longest I've seen this run was for an exceptionally heavy layout with almost 1,000 elements on it, and it took 17 minutes. So as you can see, this is how long it took. I'm thinking about changing this just to be a global variable that you can check your inspector for to see, but we'll see. So this is our results, and you can see we have, if you have an object name on the thing, it's going to show up here. Otherwise, it just kind of copies over this is just the way that the XML does it itself. It copies over the object type over into the name. But if you are trying to track down something in particular, a good way to do it is to go ahead and name that object. And if you want to see how much local CSS is on there before you run this process, and then you can actually look and see. There's quite a bit of CSS on some of these objects here. That's 2K, almost 2K of local CSS just on this one button right here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to store this report, and I'm going to say this is FM starting point 3 contacts. So I just give it a unique name, and I'm going to go ahead and store the report because we have a lot more options once we store it as far as really looking at this information. So here's the same thing. It still has the same CSS and such. But one thing you'll notice right off is right here I show how many duplicates in this layout exactly match this CSS. And so it matches all of it, not just the first 100 characters, which is what I ran into when I first started trying to compare this because of indexing in FileMaker. It would only check the first 100 characters. But this actually checks all of it and compares it to all the other items on the element on the layout, and there's 6 copies of that CSS, which means that I can get, if I take that local style and create a theme for that style and then apply it to all 6 of these elements, I'm actually going to save 6.46 kilobytes off my layout just from this one CSS change right here. This button right here, name duplicates for comparison, it just cycles through all of these elements, and the first instance it finds of this exact kind of CSS, it's going to name it, for example, field 1. Since this one is different, the CSS is different between these two, this one we'll call field 2. And so everything will get a name, so you can kind of track what's what among them. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. It just takes a second. And then I'm going to sort here, and we can see our biggest items. We have about 2K of CSS showing up 12 times. Here's our 12 copies of it right here on this type of button. If we change that local CSS to a theme, we're going to save 23 kilobytes on our layout size. Right now, this CSS is repeated in the layout 12 times. So if we create a theme out of this and use that theme instead, then FileMaker only stores this one time, and the rest of the other 11 use that one reference, which is where we get our numbers. We have this amount times 12, or basically times 11, because it's one less, and that gives us our total weight. So we have 12 items here. Here, this is a lot lighter. It's only 369 characters. As you can see, it's a lot less CSS, but there's 35 copies of it. So that's why I'm sorting by our total savings here. Because we have so many of these text objects that have this styling on it, then by assigning all of those 35 items to a class, I still save 12 kilobytes.
Yeah, that's a lot of savings, Mike. So because it's cumulative of all these items. So if we want to save all these things, let's go through that process. So what do we need to do?
So we have the buttons. Now, one of the things that you have to notice about how FileMaker stores the information about the top left, for example, here, this is not top left from the screen like it shows in the inspector. Unfortunately, it's top left from its containing object. So if it's on the background, or it's not within like a tab control or something like that, then it will be correct from the top left of the screen, and there it is. But if the item is inside of a tab control or something like that, then it's measured from the top left of that tab control down to where this is.
So Mike, so now that you have this information, what are the next steps you can do?
Well, the next thing you would do is to go to your layout for each of these instances of this button. So you have a button that is 36 from the top and 14 from the left, and you go to that button and assign a class to that button so that it is no longer local CSS. And then after that, you find the next one and assign the same class to the next one. You just go cycling through each of your elements that has the same style as the previous one and assign the themes. That's the whole purpose of themes, is to get rid of all that local weight.
Perfect. Now you can do this in bulk too, right? We mentioned that previously.
Yes, you can. Well, you can strip out all of the local CSS, which means you're going to change the way the information looks. Like if I have something, in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new layout here. And so let's apply a theme to it. Okay, so if I draw something on here and that's white, naturally, if I do my inspector, you see my styles, that's the default style for it. Now I could actually make it an accent color. Accent color 1, that's a style. But if I go in here and I change the fill myself to something else, that's now local styling. You see it turned red. Same thing is true with, say, some text here. If I go in here and I make that bold and I make it big, so now I have all this local styling and it's on default, but it's not actually a default. accent color is on accent color 1, but it's not actually accent color 1 because it's red. So I can go in here and copy this, and I'm going to go back home here. I'm going to bring in, I have 2 objects with 2 instances of local CSS, and I'm going to clear local CSS. That's already done, and I'm going to go here, and I'm actually going to delete this, and I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to paste it. See, I pasted it, and the orange is gone, and the bold and stuff is gone, because it took out the local styling. And if I look at this, this is black again.
So that's a bulk operation that strips all local CSS out and restores it back to a consistent, shared?
Whatever the default, I mean, not default, but whatever the theme, for example, this isn't default. This is accent color 1.
Right.
But whatever that base theme is, it takes it back to that level.
Very cool. Very cool. I don't think there's anything like this in the FileMaker community. If there is, I've missed it. So definitely a welcome tool. And people should feel free to play with this and get an idea of what their level of optimization is for their FileMaker layouts, because I think this will help them speed things up, because if they optimize, the layouts will actually run faster. I mean, obviously, removing objects from the layout is the fastest way to speed things up, but once you've removed the objects and you're down to the minimum number of objects, then removing local CSS actually will speed things up additionally as well, right?
Correct. That's all. It's all just weight, especially whenever you have multiple instances of the same local CSS. Another thing this doesn't check exactly is somewhere where you have almost the exact same CSS and a whole lot of local CSS to it, but you added one more, like maybe you italicized it on top of the fact that you'd already changed the border and the color and everything else. You have 15 items that have a new border, a new color, and all this kind of stuff, and then a 16th item that is italicized as well. A good way to do that, if you want to have some local style, is go ahead and assign all 16 items that base style, and if you only have one and you're only going to have one of something else, then italicize that one object, and that's fine. Local CSS isn't completely of the devil. It's just that when as soon as you have 2, now you have redundancy, and you shouldn't start to try to reduce that extra weight from the layout by taking out those extra copies by combining them into a style.
Well, I want to thank you for the hard work, Mike. I know the folks in the FileMaker community will appreciate this. I guess if they have questions, they can shoot them to support at RC Consulting, and we'll try to answer them, but it is a free tool, so there is a limited amount of support that we can offer for this. So for Richard Carlton at learningfilemaker.com, I'll see you next week.